growing up in the 1980s, it never occurred to me that there would be any kind of LGBT content in school beyond somebody yelling faggot at me in the hallway.
For decades, LGBTQ content has not only been absent in states' curricula, but in some cases has even been actively prohibited thanks to something called no pro-homo laws. Regrettably, these aren't just laws from the past. Indeed, 8 U.S. states still have such laws on the books today. Take Alabama, for example, whose education code mandates that, quote, classes must emphasize, in a factual manner and from a health perspective, that homosexuality is not a lifestyle acceptable to the general public, and that homosexual conduct is a criminal offense under the laws of the state. With policies like this, it's no wonder that LGBTQ youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than straight youth. California Senator Mark Leno sought to change this. In 2011, he put forth a bill that would finally give LGBTQ voices from the past a platform in public schools and classrooms. Enter the Fair Education Act of 2011. The Fair Education Act requires schools to include factual lessons about social movements, current events, and history of people of color, people with disabilities, and LGBT people into existing social studies coursework. The law asks educators to bring in the perspectives and stories from others through fair, accurate, inclusive, and respectful means. Of course, not everyone was in favor of the bill. The California Republican Party and other social conservatives criticized the policy for forcing educators to, quote, not just tolerate, but advocate, quote, for LGBTQ youth. Furthermore, they took exception to the wording in the bill that stated that, quote, nothing could reflect adversely, quote, on homosexual lifestyles, opining that this essentially asked educators to go against their own moral code. However, an initiative to repeal the bill, SB 48, failed to gather enough signatures to qualify for the ballot, and by mid-2011, the Fair Education Act was signed into law. 3 more states have followed in California's footsteps by enacting similar legislation of their own. Colorado's HB 19-1192 and New Jersey's A 1335 were passed in 2019, while in Illinois, HB 246 was passed earlier this year in 2020. So what does the Fair Education Act look like in a classroom for both teachers and students? Professor Layla Roop of California State University put it best, quote, just imagine every student, including queer students, seeing mirrors as well as windows. One key step towards the building of those mirrors was celebrated in 2017, when California state officials voted to approve the very first revised K-8 textbooks that were designed specifically to show students that LGBTQ individuals are, quote, a part of our collective community, both past and present. Textbook editors worked closely with politicians, educators, and historians over the course of 6 years to create America's first textbook that is both developmentally appropriate and uniquely inclusive. As one of the consultants, Dawn Romsberg, professor of Women's and Gender Studies at Sonoma State University, put it, the new textbooks are, quote, a way for everyone to understand that they belong. Indeed, California's new textbooks truly show significant progress in terms of inclusion when compared to textbooks that are currently in use throughout other regions of the U.S. Californian students may be the first in the nation to begin learning about important historical events, such as the story of non-binary members of Native American communities who identified as Two-Spirits. These community leaders were excluded from important talks with the U.S. government authorities at a pivotal moment in history simply because of their gender identity. Students will also learn about the important contributions of individuals whom today may identify as transgender throughout America's history. For example, students will read all about the brave individuals who were born women but who went on to fight in the American Civil War as men and continued to identify as such well after the conflict was over. While the law is still young, positive outcomes for LGBTQ youth have already begun to be observed by researchers. According to a 2015 study by Sylvia Escobar, professor of child development from California State University, just 4 years after enacting the Fair Education Act, LGBTQ youth had already begun to benefit. In the study, LGBTQ students who attended schools where the new LGBTQ inclusive curriculum was being taught reported feeling a significant increase in their sense of safety at school, as compared to those attending schools that had not yet adopted the new guidelines. In the same study, a dramatic decrease in missed instruction days was observed between the groups as well. LGBTQ students who attended schools without the inclusive curriculum missed nearly twice as many days of instruction as those students who attended schools with the inclusive curriculum. Researchers and educators are hopeful that the Fair Education Act will also lead to a rise in graduation rates for LGBTQ youth as the curriculum spreads. Indeed, every student deserves to see themselves represented through the stories and histories they learn about at school. While there is still a lot of work to be done, the Fair Education Act is a small yet significant step forward in creating an inclusive educational experience that each and every student deserves.